In this video, I'm going to be reacting to Dr. Rena Malik's video on this recent study. It's not really a study, it's actually a meta-analysis, basically a review of a bunch of studies that were done over the years on the average penile size. And basically this meta-analysis concluded that the average penis size has actually increased significantly over the years, which is quote unquote concerning to doctors. So this is a little bit counterintuitive to what people in the community would think because of, lower testosterone and all these things. It's going to be interesting what this doctor actually has to say about this meta-analysis. There's been a lot of talk about this meta-analysis in the community, and I haven't really looked into it myself. I personally, it doesn't really matter because we can increase our own penis size, so it doesn't really matter to me. But I think it's going to be interesting to see it, to learn more about the study and what this doctor has to say about it. So let's get started. Okay, so this is Dr. Rena Malik. She actually has about, I think, 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube. She's very popular. I've covered one of her videos before, and you actually see me talk a lot about her in some coming videos. She's quite popular in the community, has some interesting videos, and actually has admitted that traction therapy does increase penile size. You'll see my reaction to it in the other video. So I want to see what she has to say about about the study that came out. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of talk in the community about this particular study. I think a lot of it may be cope, honestly, from the community, because a lot of people say that, oh, this was like self-measured, or it doesn't make any sense because testosterone levels have gone down over the years, and so on. So I think there was a lot of basically people were talking shit about the study, for lack of a better words. And so I didn't really, as I mentioned, I didn't really look too much into the study because as I mentioned, I don't really give a shit. Like we can all make our dicks bigger, so it's gonna be way bigger than any average, so it doesn't really matter. But hey, if this is true, it's brutal for those boomers, brutal. So really excited to say, hey, congratulations to the newer generations, and if they do end up having bigger dicks. I don't consider 6 to be super big. I basically have always considered 6 inches to be on average. But essentially, if I recall correctly, what this study basically said, that the average went up from like 5 inches to like 6 inches or so. In any case, let's see what the doctor has to say.
Did you know that penile lengths on average have grown over the last 29 years? That means that men's actually increased over the last 29 years. I'm Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and I'm going to explain a brand new study that looked into this and explain exactly what that means for us. So this is actually pretty surprising because over the years, we've seen a decline in average testosterone.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that I mentioned. So a lot of reasons why the average testosterone of male has gone down. A lot of it is because of consumption of this small particles in plastics. So, when you're drinking water or food, or you're heating up food, there's basically particles in the plastic that lower your average testosterone. And as we know, the lower your testosterone, the lower your DHT, and which dictates male penile size. It's also been found that even in like things like tap water, because a lot of women are taking, birth control, and then they go and pee in places where they don't they basically filter out. It doesn't actually filter out the byproducts of this medicine. And if you take it, it actually lowers your, it can alter your endocrine profile. And so, this is something that I've heard about, and like that we know as a fact that testosterone levels have gone down over the years.
Testosterone levels, more testicular tumors, and more genital defects in newborn babies. In fact, we've also seen sperm counts have gone down worldwide. If you want to learn more about that, check out my video where I talked about it. But one would expect that with all these changes, there may be actually changes in the visual appearance of the genitalia as well. In a study, a group of researchers did what we call a systematic review. And so they looked for studies where penile length, girth, circumference was measured by a researcher, not by the participant themselves, and they were
Okay, so here's one of the key parts. So they only looked at studies in which the participants were measured by an actual physician, okay, or an actual, like a nurse and someone that was not, it wasn't a self-reported study. Now it doesn't, at least, I haven't looked at the study itself, but she doesn't mention here that whether it was like bone press versus non-bone press. I would imagine that the researchers were smart enough to make sure that, they're looking at like either bone press or non-bone press, or just, taking apart the variable that is the fat pad, that is the body fat percentage. So I'm very much assuming that they looked at it or for bone press, which is the standard.
adults, and they had at least 10 or more people in the study. If you had reported your own measurements or you had recent surgery, you were excluded from being part of this study. And they found 75 articles. Of those, 19 studies were in North America, 19 studies were in Europe, 5 in South America, and the rest in different places around the world. And this covered over 55,000 men. And they looked at penile length, flaccid, stretched, and erect. The reason people often use stretched penile length is because we believe it's a surrogate of the erect penile length of a person.
Yeah. So this is something that's really funny. A lot of people that don't believe in, in PE say like, oh, it only increases your stretched flaccid length, which has nothing to do with your erect length. Well, that's cope. Like literally, you just heard the doctor here say that that basically the stretched flaccid length is a surrogate. It's basically a 1-to-1, or very close 1-to-1 to your erect length. So here you have it here, folks.
Because it's kind of awkward sometimes to recruit patients for a study and then induce an erection medically. However, in the study,
and you can actually induce an erection. You hear me talk about these injections all the time. But yeah, I mean, it can be a little uncomfortable, especially for people that are not used to it. So I can see like it's just much easier to just pull the penis and measure it.
Is where they had erect measurements. They either had men have a spontaneous erection or they gave them an intracavernosal injection, which is an actually medically induced erection through an injection into the erectile tissue of the penis. And now I know this sounds super scary, but in fact, it's really a small needle and most people tolerate it quite well.
Exactly. So I talk about injections all the time, PGE1 injections. I use them a lot for sex. I use them a lot for rehabilitate my penis, and I use them a lot to basically gain size, induce basically micropriapisms, which has made it girthier over time. I also do a lot of weight hanging. Full disclosure, I'm actually hanging right now with the LG hanger. But anyways, so over the years this has made it longer and bigger, and I use PGE1 injections all the time. It's a small needle, it doesn't really hurt. A lot of people are like really scared of needles or like really scared of injections, and I don't understand, but to me it's basically painless.
Around 40,000 men had flaccid length and stretched length, and about 18,000 men had erect. So 64 studies looked at stretched penile length, and they found that measurements range from 3.5 to 6.9 inches.
All right, so the lowest was in this study was 3.5 inches. Brutal. Sorry for those guys. To 6.9 inches, so not even full 7 inches, which is not that big in my opinion. You see people like Johnny Sins have like penises like over like a little bit over 7. Danny D is like 8.5 or so. Mandingo is like up there like 9.5. So yeah, I guess if those were your minimum and the maximums, I think you I don't know. There's a little bit questionable, to be quite honest, because we all know that there's people out there with like really big penises. Obviously we see those in like porn and stuff like that. So it's questionable why they didn't make it into the studies, but hey, let's see.
Or for those of you who use centimeters, 9.8 to 17.5 centimeters. And the average length was 5.1 inches or 12.9 centimeters. And this did vary across nations, with the longest happening to be in South America.
Yeah, let's go Latinos. Oh, winning. We won the last World Cup. I guess we win the dick wars also.
And the shortest in Asia. And of the 20
brutal
studies that looked at erect length, the numbers were similar but not exactly the same. The ranges were from 3.7 to 6.6 inches or 9.5 to 16.7.
So we see, actually, that's interesting, a small variance in the erect length. So slightly less. So as I say, it's it's not exactly a 1-to-1, but it's very close. So here we were here very close to the flaccid length. Could be a lot of could depend on the strength of the erection and all this stuff. So that's why it's, I think that's why you see some of the variance here.
7 to 6.6 inches or 9.5 to 16.7 centimeters with an average length of 5.5 inches or 13.9 centimeters. And interestingly, what they found is when they looked at these numbers over the course of decades, they found that over time, stretched penile length didn't change. However, when they looked at the erect length over decades, they found that it increased by 24% from
Wow, that's crazy. That's super, super interesting. Let me hear that again.
Found that over time, stretched penile length didn't change. However, when they looked at the erect length over decades, they found that it increased by 24% from 4.8 inches to 6 inches. Now you guys...
Okay, that's sketch. So they're saying that the flaccid length didn't increase, but yet the erect length increased. So they're saying that flaccid length was actually less than erect length. I mean, you know, and it improved over the years. I mean, my first thought is like, well, how were they measuring erect length before? Was it a self-induced erection? Was it induced via injections? We know that PGE1, for example, was introduced like in the 90s. So perhaps they were looking at, erect length before PGE1 was really introduced and used to induce erections. I don't know. That's super sketch.
You guys might be thinking, this is great news, right? But maybe it's not. First of all, let's take a little deeper dive into the data. When they looked at things like geographic region, age, the type of volunteers that were involved in the studies, were they volunteers or were they people who had urologic needs and went to a urologist? And how did they get the erection? Was it through intracavernosal injection or through spontaneous erection?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, when you get an erection with an injection, it's 100% basically. You know, given that you were given the correct dosage, that you don't have any sort of like severe venous leaks. But it's basically, even if you're in a doctor, right? But if you try to get an erection in front of a doctor, even if she's hot, like you're gonna be nervous, right? So I think it matters a lot.
They found that these factors didn't really change the fact that the sizes increased over time. However, looking at these graphs, I saw something interesting. When you look at subject population, you see most of the increase is due to those who volunteered rather than those who were from a urology clinic. Similarly, if you look at the technique to achieve erection, those who had intracavernosal injections were more likely to see this increase in size.
I told you. That's fucking dead ass. I fucking told you. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that that stretched flaccid length was going to be less than erect length. If anything, you would expect that it's going to be more, right? Because you're stretching it, right? And as opposed to an erection that is, is induced by the body. So, what that tells me that it just wasn't a super hard 100% erection, right? And that tells me that over time, at the beginning, doctors just weren't using the injections to induce an erection, whereas later on, that's basically become more the standard.
But ultimately, the researchers controlled for these factors and it didn't change the findings. So why did stretched penile length not increase, but erect penile length did? Well, the theory is that stretched penile length may not be an adequate indicator in some people. So particularly in older men, you'll see that stretched penile length is longer than their erect length because they tend to get more elasticity in their tissues as they age. Additionally, the force created by the body to create an erection is actually larger than the force you can obtain from a human being actually stretching the penis. So what does this mean for you watching? Great, people have longer penises. That sounds like a good thing.
Okay, let's see. This is really interesting and relevant to actually what I've just
controlled for these factors and it didn't change the findings. So why did stretched penile length not increase but erect penile length did? Well, the theory is that stretched penile length may not be an adequate indicator in some people. So
that's super interesting because a lot of studies concluded that stretched penile length is, as she even said, a surrogate of erect length. So what she's saying is some people, you actually have a stretchier penis when it's soft, the one that's erect.
Particularly in older men, you'll see that stretched penile length is longer than their erect length because they tend to get more elasticity in their tissues as they age.
So that's interesting because then apparently when you age, your skin becomes more elastic, which makes sense, right? You lose the collagen fibers break down, you lose some of that collagen, and you pull it and I guess it can be stretchier.
Additionally, the force created by the body to create an erection is actually larger than the force you can obtain from a human being actually stretching the penis. So what as they age longer than their erect length because they tend to get more elasticity in their tissues as they age. Additionally, the force created by the body to create an erection is actually larger than the force you can obtain from a human being actually stretching. The researchers controlled for these factors and it didn't change.
Sorry, I keep going back and forth, but I think this is the most interesting part. I want to make sure I understand it before I, review it here.
Findings. So why did stretched penile
length did not increase, but erect penile length did increase? Okay, so basically erect length increased, but stretched flaccid length did not.
Length not increase, but erect penile length did. Well, the theory is that stretched penile length may not be an adequate
Stretched penile length was less than erect length, which is really interesting. I think counterintuitive to what a lot of guys would think. Even with say PE or getting older, you would expect your flaccid, if you pull on it, you're pulling on it hard, like you would expect that to be longer than your erection, right?
Indicator in some people. So particularly in older men, you'll see that stretched penile length is longer than their erect length because they tend to get more elasticity in their tissues as they age. Additionally, the force...
Wait, this doesn't make sense. I mean, she literally just said that that the stretched penile flaccid length was less than erect length. But she's saying this is not the case for older men.
So particularly in older men, you'll see that stretched penile length is longer than their erect length because they tend to...
So this doesn't make any sense.
Controlled for these factors, and it didn't change the findings. So why did stretched penile length not increase, but erect penile length did? Well, the theory is that stretched penile length may not be an adequate indicator in some people. So particularly in older men, you'll see that stretched penile length is longer than their erect length because they tend to get more elasticity in their tissues as they age. Additionally, the force created by the body to create an erection is actually larger than the force you can obtain from a human being actually stretching the penis.
Okay. So let's review over this because a little sketch. Okay, so she's saying that older men, so that the reason that this may be is because as men age, their stretched flaccid length is going to be greater than their erect length, right? Because as you age, your tissues become softer, you lose collagen and all that.
It's actually larger than the force you can obtain from a human being actually stretching the penis.
And then she's saying that when you induce an erection, when you get an erection, those forces that are, basically pulling and pushing on your penis are greater than your own hand. I find it hard to believe, especially not for the stretching. When you're pulling on it, you can have very high forces, whereas there's only so many, so much force that your body's going to produce internally, depending on your blood and the tissue, the spongy tissue that holds the smooth muscle, basically that holds the erection. So I find that sketch.
So what does this mean for you watching? Great, people have longer penises. That sounds like a good thing, but is it? Interestingly, researchers theorize that the changes in penile length may be due to a number of different factors. One is that boys are going through puberty earlier than they used to. This may be due to chemicals, pesticides, and other things in our environment that may be disrupting our hormone system or our endocrine system.
Okay, so basically one theory is that basically the boys are, going into puberty earlier. Now, does that mean that puberty lasts longer? Because even if they go into it earlier, think about it, you go into it earlier, you're going to start off with a smaller dick because you're younger, right? Slightly smaller because you go through dick growth spurts if you look at the charts. And then it would only really make sense if your puberty lasts longer, because that gives you more time for your dick to grow. But if the puberty lasts the same time, wouldn't that indicate that you're actually going to end up with a slightly smaller dick, right? Because you started off smaller. Does this mean that if you go in, if you start puberty earlier and your DHT receptors in your penis, for example, are so sensitive that that DHT has a much greater effect? Maybe. That's, interesting.
And this can then lead to puberty happening earlier ages and subsequently causing longer penile length. It's really unusual to see such a dramatic change over a short period of time. We do know that certain things in our environment can affect our reproductive system. So could this be a negative? Certainly. Ultimately, we need to be thoughtful about what we're putting in the environment, what we're putting on our bodies, what we're eating, and what we're exposed to, because it may be having a negative impact on our body.
Okay, there you go. That was actually a lot more interesting than I thought. I don't think it was a great video, to be quite honest. A couple things that I'll touch on, just that I remember. Number one is the whole age when it comes to the difference between flaccid and erect length. I mean, you would have thought that they controlled for the age group, so I don't think that makes any sense, right? If they would have controlled for the age group and it was true what she was saying about how nothing really changed, it's just because when you get older, your flaccid penis gets stretchier. Well, if they control for the age group, we would have seen the exact same results in those age groups over time, right? So that didn't really make any sense unless they didn't control for the age, which why wouldn't they, right? Like the age groups are there. And then the whole like the force that your body generates is greater than how hard you can pull on your dick. I mean, like that intuitively just doesn't make any sense. Now, full disclosure, I don't care enough about this study or meta-analysis to look into it. We know as a fact that the average penis size, at least here in America, is anywhere from 5 to 6 inches. And actually, if you look at my other video of like Does Size Matter, which I'll link somewhere up here, I say that in my opinion, the average length is actually closer to 6 inches, more so than 5.5, just from anecdotal evidence from girls. But if you watch like a lot of the amateur porn, this is kind of what you're gonna see. So I think 5.5 is a little bit of cope. So and this video really didn't tell me anything as to like the actual reason why this increase has happened. Is just kind of speculated as to why there's the differences. It talked about like why this is counterintuitive to what we would expect, but I didn't really honestly learn much from this video. So I think if I might make a video on the actual study, go into it. I think it's gonna be a little too time consuming. Like, I mean, if you want me to go, like, leave a comment and I'll take a look at it, but I don't think it ultimately really, really matters. Like, who cares? We're here to make ourselves better, be the versions of ourselves that we can be. Somewhat interesting, but like, I don't know why you would particularly care. But if you want me to go into it and sort of do my own analysis and really dig into more as to why, the age differences and the forces and all that stuff, leave me a comment and a few likes and I might do a video on it. But all in all, I think it's somewhat interesting. It was way more interesting than I thought. I think this study has been controversial for a reason among the community. So I think this was sort of an interesting take from the doctor. In my opinion, not particularly educating, but there you go. That's my reaction. So stay tuned for more videos and I'll see you next time. Peace.